Today, I am going to be talking about a very important topic that is heavily discussed in the world today. However, what I see as a major flaw is that while we're all starting at the same premise, which is trying to figure out how to cure disease and optimize health, once we start going down that road, everything splits. So my presentation today is about the pathways to curing disease and optimizing health. But what should the primary root cause of curing disease and optimizing health be, you ask? The endocannabinoid system, which is the master regulatory system of the entire human body. So why am I going to be focusing on the endocannabinoid system as the primary focus for curing disease and optimizing health? Well, we all need a universally agreed upon definition of what being healthy or curing disease even means. And it's my goal that we can have a universally agreed upon definition by using the endocannabinoid system as the primary target to cure disease and optimize health. What we're going to do today is go through the timeline of discoveries in the endocannabinoid system, starting from the first discovery, which was in the year I was born, in 1988. And that was with the discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1. Now, what I'm going to do is take you through that entire timeline from 1988 to today. And what you will see is that through these decades of research, we have been finding clear targets to cure disease and optimize health. And the amazing thing about these discoveries over the last 34 years, the discoveries have been more and more astounding as the research goes deeper. So after decades of research, we're now starting to get a full picture of these primary targets for curing disease and optimizing health, and lots of supporting research to show how important the endocannabinoid system is as a primary target for curing disease and optimizing health. The big issue that we have today is that we don't have a universally agreed upon definition on what the pathways to curing disease and optimizing health are. However, through the research that I've been doing on health optimization, curing disease, and then tying that into the research that I've done with the endocannabinoid system, I've personally figured out that this is the pathway. And I'm not the only person who's saying this. I'm just the guy who's trying to popularize ideas that scientists have been working on since, like I said, 1988, when I was born, years before that as well. And the reason that I am so passionate about this topic is because, to me, the research is clear. We take this a step further, and then what we show is that the anecdotal evidence is very, very clear too. There is a reason that cannabis, for example, works so well with the human body, and we're going to get to that. And why do I believe that this should be the universally agreed upon definition for the pathways of curing disease and optimizing health? The way that I see the endocannabinoid system is that it's the single system of the human body that connects all other systems of the human body. Now, I'm sure you've heard of many of the other systems of the human body. The nervous system, the lymphatic system, the endocrine system, the digestive system, your reproductive system. But when do you hear the endocannabinoid system tied into this conversation? Usually when we're having the conversation about curing disease and optimizing health, we're talking about certain pathways, receptors, compounds within your body. Think dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, magnesium, potassium, sodium. Even your genetics are discussed. Again, barely anyone is discussing the endocannabinoid system's connection to all these other systems. And what this timeline that we're going to go through is going to show you is that through all of these discoveries, we've really found how it really connects the entire human body as one. Since every single system of the human body, all the way down to your genetics, has some kind of connection to the endocannabinoid system, and the endocannabinoid system controlling all of those other systems, I believe that the endocannabinoid system is that system that connects all other systems. It is the system that brings us into one. If you notice how modern medicine is done, you're focusing on isolated regions of the body. And as a result, I believe that this is the reason we can't figure out the proper pathway to curing disease and optimizing health. But the way that I see it is that most people in the health space today are just picking at the branches. Nobody's really going to the root. And the endocannabinoid system is that root. So where did the knowledge of the endocannabinoid system even begin? I mentioned that in 1988 was the first discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1 that started giving us the outlook of the classical endocannabinoid system. However, for decades prior to that, there was research being done on cannabis compounds like THC and CBD. So how did we discover the endocannabinoid system of our body? Through figuring out how phytocannabinoids like THC actually interact with our body. And that's actually how CB1 was discovered. What's wild to me is that in the time that I've been alive, we went from not knowing how the cannabis plant works at all to understanding that the cannabis plant has led us into understanding the framework of the master regulatory system of the human body. Ask yourself right now, what does being healthy mean to you? And do you think that if you asked 50 other people that they would have the same definition, or that they would all have generally different definitions than you? To me, the scientific research on this topic is abundantly clear. When we take this to the next step, we find that the anecdotal evidence, to me at least, is even more abundantly clear. So if you can see my confidence on this topic, it's because I use the endocannabinoid system as a primary pathway to cure my incurable disease. I really don't believe in the word incurable because everything has a cure. What healthcare professionals are essentially telling you is that we don't know, therefore there is no cure. And if you know basic logic, you know that's a pretty strong fallacy. So what was my incurable disease? After decades of sports injuries and stress that were never properly healed, I eventually got severe fasciculation syndrome and injury-induced neuropathy that got so bad that I couldn't even walk down the street without my body aching. And in only a few years' time of targeted treatments of focusing on the endocannabinoid system as that primary pathway, I am now cured. Now, that's just my personal experience. I've seen plenty of people cure cancer, autoimmune disorders, and a whole list of diseases that we supposedly don't have cures for. So you've already heard me mention cannabis compounds like THC and CBD. And the reason that they are such important compounds is because they help balance and regulate your endocannabinoid system in ways that no other compound on earth, that I know of at least, can do for your endocannabinoid system. So the way that I look at these cannabis compounds like THC and CBD is that they work as endocannabinoid modulators, regulators, and mimetics. But as you'll see in this presentation, the endocannabinoid system has way more to do with just about every single thing that you're doing in your life than it does just the cannabis plant. All right, now let's get this party started. Let's go down the historical scientific timeline of the endocannabinoid system. Like I said, starting in 1988, the year that I was born, with cannabinoid receptor 1. As I mentioned, cannabinoid receptor 1 was actually found through trying to figure out how THC works in the human body. And what happened was that researchers determined that a rat's brain has receptor sites that are activated by THC. Now, fun fact, cannabinoid receptor 1 is the most abundant G-protein coupled receptor in our body. And did you know that a big chunk of pharmaceutical drug development targets G-protein coupled receptors? So you put 2 and 2 together there on why I'm so adamant about the endocannabinoid system being the primary pathway to curing disease and optimizing health. And this is only after the first discovery. Cannabinoid receptor 1 is concentrated in the brain and central nervous system. Further research after that showed that CB1 was present in the gut, skin, and internal organs. Cannabinoid receptor 1 signaling has proven to be critical for a bunch of different physiological processes, like the body's stress response and how we experience pain. The discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1 has huge implications for nearly every area of health sciences. And the discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1 opened the floodgates to the decades of discoveries that we have found since then. Okay, but wait, why do we have receptors that are capable of responding to phytocannabinoids like THC? Scientists realized that there had to be an endogenous THC-like compound that signaled through these receptors. And from there, the search was on for cannabinoid 1 receptors triggers. Triggers, you say? Well, a few years later, in 1992, the first endocannabinoid neurotransmitter was discovered by scientists, and that is called anandamide, or the scientific name arachidonyl ethylonamine. They called this neurotransmitter anandamide because in Sanskrit that means bliss. And today we know anandamide as the bliss molecule, or our internal natural antidepressant. All right, now things are starting to get fun. Stay with me here. We're going to be connecting a lot of dots, and all these dots are going to connect to give you the big full picture. The cool thing about anandamide and THC is that they fit into your cannabinoid receptor 1 in similar ways. Anandamide and THC act in similar ways when they bind to cannabinoid receptor 1. Kind of like a key fitting into a lock. Anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid, and THC, which is a phytocannabinoid, are both signaling molecules that turn on cannabinoid receptor 1. This initiates a bunch of changes within your cells that regulate so many different physiological functions. This includes appetite, sleep, mood, glucose metabolism, pain, even fertility and reproduction. So when I say that the endocannabinoid system is controlling and regulating all these other systems, this is where we are just in 1992. And a cool thing about CBD is that CBD can be seen as an anandamide reuptake inhibitor, balancer. It helps your endocannabinoids work more efficiently. Our cells create anandamide when we need it, like when our bodies need to stay balanced during stressful situations. Studies later showed that practices like exercising can boost anandamide levels, resulting in what we know as the runner's high. Now, there is a massive misconception in the mainstream health world that the runner's high is a boost in endorphins. However, modern research shows that the opioid system is not modulating that experience at all, and it's actually your endocannabinoids that are boosting and giving you that feeling. By binding to cannabinoid receptor 1, anandamide protects neurons and facilitates neurogenesis, which is the creation of new brain cells. Now, I mentioned that THC and CBD both work with the endocannabinoid system. However, unlike THC, CBD does not directly fit in to the receptor like a key fitting into a lock. But CBD still has action around the receptor. And if you've ever had a bad experience from using THC and CBD together can help balance out and regulate any of the negative side effects that you may get from using THC. All right, it's 1993 now, and scientists have just discovered cannabinoid receptor 2. Cannabinoid receptor 2, or CB2, is present throughout the entire immune system, the peripheral nervous system, metabolic tissue, and different internal organs. This discovery showed us how cannabinoid signaling can regulate inflammation and why cannabinoid therapies could be a really useful treatment for disease. Cannabinoid 2 receptor signaling is implicated in metabolic syndrome, peripheral neuropathy, insulin resistance, liver disease, and a variety of inflammatory conditions. Cannabinoid receptor 2 is found in all immune cells, which modulates immune functions. Cannabinoid receptor 2 is significantly upregulated in a brain injury or a neurodegenerative condition, such as Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis. In comes CBD as that endocannabinoid balancer and regulator, and we start seeing a bigger picture of how these plant cannabinoids confer their benefits. So THC stimulates cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2. However, when THC binds to CB2, it does not trigger the psychoactive effects that cannabis is known for, being high. Because CB2 receptors are not concentrated in the brain like CB1 receptors are. So that's how you get high. THC binds to CB1. So after all of this was discovered, these scientists were really focused on figuring out how to heal without causing the high by creating drugs that stimulate cannabinoid receptor 2 while bypassing cannabinoid receptor 1. But anandamide, the endocannabinoid that binds to cannabinoid receptor 1, actually has very little binding affinity to cannabinoid receptor 2, which means there must be another natural compound, some endogenous molecule produced by the body that activates CB2 receptors. What could that be? Well, all it took was a few years to figure that one out. We're in 1995 now, and 2-AG has been discovered. Compared to anandamide, 2-AG, or 2-arachidonylglycerol, proved to be way more potent, more prevalent, and more broadly expressed throughout the body. 2-AG levels in the human brain are approximately 170 times higher than those of anandamide. And 2-AG binds efficiently to both cannabinoid receptors, cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2. And 2-AG levels in the brain surge after a head injury or a stroke. Like anandamide, 2-AG is involved in modulating a wide range of mental and physiological processes. While 2-AG and anandamide are both endocannabinoids and they're very similar and complementary in many ways, there are specific functional differences between these two endocannabinoids. For example, anandamide and 2-AG both protect cells against oxidative damage, and both compounds are adaptive in response to stress. But in very distinct ways. And they're created and deactivated by different metabolic enzymes. But what could those metabolic enzymes be? Here's a fun fact for you. Endocannabinoids are endogenously synthesized from the omega-6 and omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. So you're starting to get a real big picture of how powerful the endocannabinoid system really is in regards to your daily lifestyle. Wait. Did somebody say metabolic enzymes? Because we're in 1996 and going into 1997 now, and scientists have just discovered the metabolic enzymes that break down endocannabinoids. So endocannabinoids are born and then they're broken down by different types of enzymes. These metabolic enzymes make endocannabinoids when they're needed and then degrade them after they serve their purpose. Anandamide is broken down by FAAH, or fatty acid amide hydrolase, while 2-AG is primarily broken down by MAGL, which is monoacylglycerol lipase. Got it. So in 1996, the molecular structure of FAAH was first characterized. And then the following year, in 1997, MAGL was identified as a key enzyme that breaks down 2-AG. So why are metabolic enzymes important? Because metabolic enzymes are what regulate endocannabinoid activity by controlling the endocannabinoid levels. And because anandamide and 2-AG degrade super fast, blocking their enzymatic metabolism by inhibiting FAAH and MAGL can elevate and regulate endocannabinoid levels and extend cannabinoid receptor signaling with neuroprotective benefits. Now, what could possibly help with that? Oh, we've already talked about it. CBD and THC. Cool. So do you see where we are now? It's been almost a decade since the first discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1. So what we found in the first decade of studying the endocannabinoid system are cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2, anandamide, 2-AG, FAAH, and MAGL. And this framework is what is known as the classical endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system really does modulate most biological functions, and it plays a pivotal role in maintaining a healthy, stable environment inside the body, despite constantly changing external inputs and stressors. It's called homeostasis, and we're trying to get there. So as the research continued, we started to really deepen our understanding of how this system works and found that not only plant cannabinoids can work with your cannabinoid receptors. Wait a minute, did this guy just say compounds other than phytocannabinoids like THC and CBD can work with your cannabinoid receptors? Well, of course, it's 1998 now, and scientists have discovered the entourage effect. Now, if you've ever bought cannabis products, you might have heard the term the entourage effect mentioned. Researchers reported that 2-AG's binding affinity for cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2 was enhanced by the presence of other endogenous lipid compounds that were not part of what was known as the classical endocannabinoid system. The entourage effect was originally intended to be a scientific phrase as a reference to the supporting structures of the endocannabinoid system, but it was quickly appropriated by the holistic health world and applied to the complex chemical makeup of the cannabis plant. See, the thing is that the effects of THC and CBD are actually influenced by a bunch of other compounds like terpenes, flavonoids, and minor cannabinoids that aren't as prevalent in the cannabis plant, such as delta-8 THC, CBC, or CBN. There are over 100 different cannabinoids that have been discovered so far. THC and CBD are just two. But as I've already discussed, even diet can influence how THC and CBD interact with your body. To make this simple, the entourage effect is the therapeutic impact of the whole plant being greater than the sum of its isolated compounds. This was a really big discovery because many of the pharmaceutical drugs that are formulated are using isolated compounds. Now, I personally formulate with isolated CBD, but I create an entourage effect with other compounds that I use with the cannabinoid. So by showing the interplay between endocannabinoids and other signaling molecules, it opened the doors to another new flood of understanding of our human biology and physiology. Well, it's 1999 now, and we're going to be talking about trip ion channels. So scientists eventually figured out tools to modulate and probe around different parts of the endocannabinoid system. By administering synthetic compounds that do things like block the CB1 receptor, scientists figured out that some of anandamide's effect actually had nothing to do with cannabinoid receptor 1. So in 1999, researchers reported that the ability of anandamide to relax blood vessels was mediated by the interaction with the TRPV1 vanilloid receptor. Later studies found that 2-AG is also active at the TRPV1 receptor, which is instrumental in regulating core body temperature and inflammatory pain. Now, CBD also binds directly to TRPV1, but like I mentioned before, not like a key fitting into a lock. And this is why actually the discoveries of CBD is so expansive. And every year we're figuring out new ways that CBD interacts with the body as we go deeper in the endocannabinoid system. And TRPV1 is one member of a large ancient family of transient receptor potential ion channels, otherwise known as TRP receptors. These function as cellular sensors in response to heat, light, sound, pain, physical pressure, and other basic visceral sensations. Several different TRP channels are modulated by endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids, including CBD and THC. The properties of a lot of different medicinal herbs are actually mediated by TRP receptors. Capsaicin from hot peppers binds to TRPV1, mustard oil and certain other spices activate TRPA1, and TRPM8 communicates the cooling sensation in menthol and peppermint. Finding that anandamide blocks TRPM8 and stimulates TRPV1 was clear evidence that endocannabinoids clearly have a wider range of molecular targets than just CB1 and CB2 receptors. It's 2001, and scientists just showed that endocannabinoids engage in a unique form of intercellular communication known as retrograde signaling. This is so important. Whereas other neurotransmitters typically travel in one direction, from the signaling cell across the synapse to the receiving cell, anandamide and 2-AG both transit in the other direction, from the postsynaptic receiving cell to the presynaptic sender. And that is why endocannabinoids are referred to as retrograde messengers. This plays a key role in how your other neurotransmitters are firing. This retrograde mechanism functions as a dynamic, bidirectional feedback loop that fine-tunes synaptic transmissions by putting the brakes on excessive physiological activity. So do you see why I keep stressing the importance of a master regulatory system? This is clearly proving that it does regulate nearly every function in the human body. Now, prior to 2001, retrograde signaling was only thought to be happening during embryonic development of the brain and central nervous system. And the scientists have discovered since then that endocannabinoids regulate embryonic and adult neurogenesis. And neurogenesis is the creation of new neurons in the brain. All right, it's 2004, and now we're talking about my personal favorite discovery in the entire endocannabinoid system timeline, and that is clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, which is the discovery that was what clearly showed me that my health problems that I was dealing with, that I mentioned in the beginning, were clearly happening from an endocannabinoid deficiency of some kind. And through understanding clinical endocannabinoid deficiency is how I figured out how to balance and regulate my endocannabinoid system to cure disease and optimize my health. All right, we got to give a huge shout out to Dr. Ethan Rousseau, who was the one who actually introduced the concept of clinical endocannabinoid deficiency in 2004. He hypothesized that diminished endocannabinoid functions is at the root of several pathologies. Dr. Rousseau specifically mentioned 4 diseases: migraines, irritable bowel, fibromyalgia, and depression. Later studies supported his thesis by linking endocannabinoid deficiency to various conditions, including epilepsy, PTSD, autism, alcoholism, and other neurodegenerative problems. And what I'm finding out now is that most, if not all, disease is linked to a deficient or dysregulated endocannabinoid system. Hence the entire point of this presentation: finding the pathways to curing disease and optimizing health. So what are the factors that are contributing to endocannabinoid dysfunction and deficiencies? Well, some are genetic, but what it seems like to me is that most of these dysfunctions are coming from poor lifestyle choices, unhealthy diet, lack of exercise, bad sleeping, drug abuse, government coercion. But as I found out, I have an extremely healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle. But why did I still have this health problem? As I mentioned in the beginning, my problem was injury-induced. I'm an athlete. After decades of compounding injuries, eventually your body starts giving out. And what does that mean? That means that my endocannabinoid system was completely out of funk. A clear overarching theme of disease is the silent killer that many of us know all too well: stress. And stress is a significant risk factor for so many diseases, and stress depletes endocannabinoid tone. And a depleted endocannabinoid tone can lead to inflammation, hypertension, elevated cortisol, hormonal imbalances, heightened blood sugar, cognitive impairment, and heightened susceptibility to disease. So it should start making sense to you more and more now why compounds like CBD, which can enhance cannabinoid receptor signaling, can be very, very powerful treatment strategies for clinical endocannabinoid deficiency disorders. And the main supplement that I used through this entire process of balancing and regulating my endocannabinoid system again to cure my disease and optimize my health: CBD. But we can take this a step further. To balance and regulate your endocannabinoid system, phytocannabinoids like THC and CBD do a very good job. But as I mentioned before, almost everything that you do in your life is going to negatively or positively impact your endocannabinoid system. As I mentioned, diet, exercise, all of these things. If you want to have a balanced and regulated endocannabinoid system, add exercise into your lifestyle, calculated breath work, yoga. These are the things that you would need to do in your life to be healthy, right? But as I mentioned in the very beginning, we need a universally agreed upon definition of what being healthy even is. And as we see with clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, if this is what is theoretically leading to most, if not all, disease, then the primary target should just be balancing your endocannabinoid system to heal. It all seems super obvious when you understand the big picture of the endocannabinoid system. All right, we're getting close to the end here. And it's 2005. What do we have? Peroxisome proliferator activated receptors, PPARs. So as the research continued, scientists just kept discovering that the therapeutic actions of endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids are not just mediated by either CB1 and CB2. So in 2005, it was reported for the first time that cannabinoid compounds bind to PPAR gamma. And PPAR gamma is a receptor that's on the surface of the cell's nucleus. PPAR gamma regulates gene expression, lipid metabolism, and energy storage. Anandamide and 2-AG both activate PPAR gamma. You know what else activates PPAR gamma? CBD. And research shows that PPAR gamma activation reduces amyloid beta plaque in the brain, which is associated with dementia. And this also prevents insulin resistance and other diabetic complications, and it's involved in the anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids. So if you've ever heard that wild-sounding statement that cannabis cures cancer, now you're starting to understand really this overarching theme. Okay, but how do anandamide and 2-AG and even CBD get inside the cell? How are these highly oily compounds able to navigate so efficiently within the cell's watery interior? How do these compounds find their way to the nucleus of the cell where they're activated by PPAR receptors? And they attach to DNA that initiates or prevents transcription of specific genes. You see how deep this is getting? Well, we have the answer for that now because it's 2009 and researchers discovered a fatty acid binding protein that transports anandamide through the cell's ecosystem. And these transport molecules also take 2-AG and other lipid compounds within the cell. Okay, after endocannabinoids like anandamide and 2-AG finish signaling via cannabinoid receptors, they attach themselves to a fatty acid binding protein transporter and they go through the cell's membrane lipid bilayer and go through various different organelles. And fatty acid binding proteins can direct endocannabinoids to the nucleus for PPAR activation or to other locations inside the cell where 2-AG and anandamide and THC and CBD are ultimately deactivated and broken down into metabolites. So what's really cool is that these same fatty acid binding proteins can function as carrier molecules for compounds like CBD and THC. A really awesome and powerful aspect of phytocannabinoids like CBD and THC are that when your endocannabinoids want to hitch a ride with those fatty acid binding proteins, these phytocannabinoids like CBD and THC can actually hijack the ride from the endocannabinoids. And what happens is that endocannabinoids like anandamide and 2-AG therefore hang around the surface of the cell longer than they usually would, which then extends cannabinoid receptor signaling. What that means is that CBD and THC inhibit a reuptake and postpone the deactivation of endocannabinoids. They're essentially signaling to the endocannabinoids on what it needs to be doing. And this may be one of the ways that CBD in particular enhances endocannabinoid tone without binding directly to CB1 or CB2. All right, y'all, it's 2012 now, and scientists have just found the presence of cannabinoid receptor 1 on the membranes of mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cells. It's what generates the energy for your cell to work in the way that it works. And this discovery shed new light on the role of the endocannabinoid system in regulating mitochondrial activity, which is crucial to how cells function. The key biological pathways that involve mitochondria include energy homeostasis, neurotransmitter release, and oxidative stress, which are all modulated by endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. All right, this gets even cooler. So by binding directly to cannabinoid receptor 1 on the mitochondrial membrane, THC actually dials back mitochondrial activity and oxidative excess. On the other hand, CBD interacts with a different set of mitochondrial receptors, including the sodium-calcium exchanger, which opens and closes the ion channels that facilitates the flow of electrically charged calcium atoms. And regulating calcium levels inside the mitochondria is one way that endocannabinoids and CBD protect neurons and maintain cellular homeostasis. MAGL, which was the main enzyme that breaks down 2-AG, is stored by the mitochondrion, while FAAH, which metabolizes anandamide, goes to the endoplasmic reticulum, which is the final stop of the fatty acid binding protein. All right, y'all, it's 25 years after the first discovery of cannabinoid receptor 1, and the framework of the classical endocannabinoid system was completely challenged by this finding: the endocannabinoid dome. So after all of these discoveries, and then finding out that THC and CBD work with multiple receptor sites through the body, we just needed a more expansive definition of what the endocannabinoid system really is. And as I mentioned before, there are various other compounds like different herbs and spices, not just cannabis compounds like THC and CBD, that can bind to CB1 and CB2 receptors. So what we're seeing is that the endocannabinoid system is highly beneficial even beyond therapies like with cannabis. But we're clearly seeing now that there are beneficial effects with other healing styles like fasting, diet, exercise, yoga, breathwork, massage. All of these are mediated by the endocannabinoid system. As a result of all of these discoveries, scientists had to start thinking of more of an enlarged endocannabinoid system, one that actually includes a bunch of different fatty acid-derived lipids in addition to anandamide and 2-AG. These endocannabinoid-like compounds are emerging as important signaling molecules on their own, and some are even metabolized by FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase, which is the enzyme that breaks down anandamide. So in 2013, the endocannabinoidome was first introduced. And the endocannabinoidome is a complex hypersystem that encompasses our innate lipidome as well as our gut microbiome. And endocannabinoid signaling facilitates crosstalk between the gut flora and the brain, which is a process that, as you might know, is fundamental to human health. Whoa, all right, we're back in 2022. It is the modern day now. And what are we going to do with all this information that you just received? Well, now you have clear biological pathways to aid in curing disease and optimizing health on a level that the mainstream health world is clearly not tuned into yet. And I hope that you can share this information to make the world a happier and healthier place, and that we can potentially come to a universally agreed upon definition for what being healthy really means.